I dropped my keys in the bowl by the front door, shrugging off my coat in the empty hallway of our townhouse in Chicago. The silence in the house hit me first. No soft hum of the TV in the living room. No scent of Mika's cooking filling the air. Even her favorite jazz playlist, usually on repeat during evenings, was absent. Just this thick, unsettling silence. "Meek," I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls. No answer. I walked toward the bedroom, a nagging pit forming in my stomach. Just as I rounded the corner into our room, I saw her, Mika, crouched beside our closet, pulling clothes off hangers and throwing them into a half-zipped suitcase sprawled across our bed. "Meek," I repeated, more confused than ever. She looked up, and her expression was unreadable, somewhere between calm and steely. "I'm leaving, Donnie," she said, her tone almost businesslike. My mouth went dry. "Leaving? What? What do you mean?" She kept packing, moving with an efficiency that suggested this wasn't a spontaneous decision. Each item she threw into the suitcase seemed to mark the end of something, a tearing down of all the little routines and memories we'd built in the 5 years we'd lived here together. "I've met someone else," she said, as if she was stating the weather, her words landing like stones. "Someone better." "Better?" My mind spun. What does that even mean? Better how? Mika sighed, not even looking at me as she folded one of her sweaters, a gift from our first trip to New York together, and placed it neatly on top of her other belongings. "Donnie, he's more successful, wealthier. He can actually offer me a life. You know, I'm tired of scraping by." Her voice sharpened. "Of you scraping by." Each word felt like a slap. "What? So this is about money?" "It's not just money." She finally turned to look at me, and her gaze was cold. He's got this drive, Donnie. He's someone people notice when he walks into a room. He's fit. He takes care of himself." I stared at her, feeling a dozen emotions rise up and collide. Is that really all it takes? A bigger bank account and a six-pack? She shrugged, giving me that same calm, detached look. "I need more than this." She gestured around the room. Our room, the place where we'd laughed, argued, shared secrets, planned for our future. I couldn't process it. This was Mika, my wife, my best friend. I thought we'd built something solid, something real. And yet, here she was dismantling it piece by piece. "Do you even care about what we've built together?" I choked out. She just rolled her eyes, her indifference stinging more than her words. "Maybe I thought I did, but I was wrong, Donnie." She yanked the zipper of her suitcase closed with a final, harsh motion. "It's time for me to move on." And just like that, I was left standing alone in a house that suddenly felt colder than it ever had. As Mika finished zipping her suitcase, she glanced toward the hallway, where the sounds of quiet footsteps meant our 2 kids, Bella and Sam, were lingering. Bella, our 8-year-old, peeked her head around the doorframe, her wide brown eyes moving from Mika's packed suitcase to my face. Confusion painted all over her expression. "Mama, where are you going?" she asked, her voice tiny and trembling. Mika barely looked at her. She stuffed her phone charger into the side pocket of her suitcase, lips pursed in annoyance, as if this conversation was just a trivial inconvenience. "Mama's going away for a while, Bella," she replied flatly. "It's something I have to do." I stepped in front of Bella, pulling her close to me. "Mika, what are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice low, though every nerve in my body screamed in disbelief. "You're just leaving them? Like this?" She shrugged, her face entirely blank. "You'll manage, Donnie. You're good with routines. They'll be fine." "Fine?" I repeated, feeling my fists clench as anger overtook the shock. "They're your children, Mika. They need you." She cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand. "They don't need me, Donnie. You do all the kid stuff anyway. The school pickups, the doctor appointments. And besides," she added, glancing dismissively at Bella, "they're at that age where they'll get over it quickly." Bella's small hand tightened around my shirt as she pressed her face into my side. I could feel her shivering, and for a moment, I couldn't bring myself to look down at her. Sam, our 6-year-old, stood just behind her, his eyes wide and round, watching as his mother packed up and dismissed him like some forgotten item on a to-do list. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "You're their mother, Mika. You're just abandoning them?" She raised an eyebrow, showing the first hint of genuine emotion since I'd walked in, though it wasn't remorse. It was irritation. "They'll adjust. Kids are resilient. Besides, she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder, I'm not going far. They can see me on the weekends, maybe, whenever it's convenient. She moved past me, her suitcase dragging along the hardwood floor. As she walked by Sam, he looked up at her with a mix of fear and confusion. Mama, can I come with you? He asked, his voice trembling. Mika glanced down at him briefly, as if he were a stranger. No, Sami, you need to stay here with Daddy. She crouched down just long enough to give him a quick, awkward hug before standing and brushing off her dress. Mommy has a new life. She has to get to, okay. With that, she turned on her heel and started down the hall, leaving the kids staring after her, their small hands reaching toward her as she walked out without a backward glance. The door closed with a quiet, final click, and we were left in the silence, my two kids and I standing in the shadow of the life Mika had just shattered. Bella clung to me, her little fingers digging into my shirt, but her voice was strong as she called after Mika. Mama, please don't go. Her words echoed down the hallway as Mika headed for the door. We'll be good. I'll do all my chores, I promise. Just stay. My heart splintered, seeing Bella's desperate attempts to reach out to her mother. She was just a kid, and yet here she was scrambling to understand why her mom was tearing out of her life. Her big brown eyes, glassy with tears, looked up at me, searching for some reassurance. I had nothing to give. Then my son, 15-year-old Dylan, stepped forward, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and betrayal. So what? That's it, Mom? His voice cracked, raw with emotion. You're just leaving us like we don't even matter? Mika turned briefly, her expression barely softening as she looked at him. Dylan, you'll be fine. You're old enough to understand this. People change, they move on. She actually said it as if it should make perfect sense, as if he should just nod along and accept it. Understand? Dylan's voice rose, echoing through the house. You're leaving us for some guy? What about us? What about Bella? What about Dad? He motioned toward me, his face a mask of barely contained rage and hurt. Mika glanced at me with a hint of annoyance, as though she were disappointed that I hadn't prepared the kids for her departure, hadn't made this all easier for her. Dylan, honey, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Sometimes things don't work out. It's just life. Bella broke into a sob, her voice quivering. Mama, please. I'll be good, I promise. Just stay with us. Please, don't go. But Mika barely flinched, barely even registered Bella's words as she reached for the doorknob. Dylan shook his head, his fists clenched at his sides, tears slipping down his cheeks. Fine, go. We don't need you anyway, he shouted, but I could see how deeply he was breaking, the raw pain just beneath his anger. Mika gave one last half-hearted shrug. I'll call you guys. We'll figure out a schedule or something. Without another word, she opened the door and walked out, not even turning back. Bella collapsed into sobs against me, her small body shaking as she whispered, Why doesn't she want us, Daddy? Why? I held her close, stroking her hair, as Dylan stood rigid, trying to hold in his own grief. He looked at me, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded. She never loved us? Not really, he muttered, his voice full of disbelief, as if he were trying to convince himself it was true. And maybe he was. I felt a mix of anger and devastation tighten around my chest. The woman I'd shared a life with, trusted to be by my side and by our kids' side, had just walked away as if we were nothing but an afterthought. As if the life we'd built together was something she could shrug off and leave in the past. I felt Dylan's hand on my shoulder, surprisingly strong. We'll be okay, Dad. We don't need her. But his voice shook, betraying the fear and heartbreak I knew he was trying to hide. I held him, too, the three of us standing in our empty, quiet house, watching the door that Mika had closed, leaving a gaping wound in our lives. And I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt like we were moving through a fog, each of us stumbling to make sense of the hollow space Mika had left behind. Bella, who had always been bright and full of energy, became a shadow of herself. She clung to me like I was the only anchor she had left, following me from room to room, her eyes wide and fearful, as if at any moment I might disappear too. Every night, after I'd finally convinced her to go to bed, I'd hear her muffled sobs from her room, the sound squeezing my chest like a vice. Sometimes she'd come creeping down the hall after midnight, dragging her blanket behind her, eyes red and swollen. She'd wordlessly crawl into bed with me, curling into a ball under my arm, and I'd hold her until she drifted off, her tiny breaths hitching as she cried herself to sleep. I was doing my best to be there for her, but the helplessness weighed on me like a lead weight. I couldn't fix this. I couldn't make her mother come back. Couldn't give her the sense of safety that Mika's betrayal had shattered. Dylan, on the other hand, channeled his hurt into a volatile mix of anger and defiance. He shut down any attempt I made to talk to him, shrugging me off with a barely restrained fury. School nights became battlegrounds, with Dylan pushing back on every rule, every suggestion, as though daring me to discipline him, to impose some sense of control. He'd come home late without explanation, disappear to his room, and when I tried to check on him, he'd snap, "Just leave me alone, Dad. You don't get it." We fought more than we ever had before. I tried to understand him, tried to be patient, but every heated exchange left me feeling like I was failing him. He'd look at me with a resentment I'd never seen before, as if I were somehow to blame for Mika's betrayal, for everything crumbling around us. One night, I heard him slamming drawers in his room and went up, bracing myself. When I opened the door, I found him throwing clothes into a duffel bag, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes flashing with anger. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He glared at me, his shoulders tense. "I'm leaving, since you obviously don't care about how I feel anyway." "Dylan, that's not true. I do care," I said, feeling desperation creep into my voice. "I know you're hurting. I know this is hard, but running away isn't going to fix anything." "You don't know anything," he shouted, his voice raw with pain. "Mom's gone, and all you can do is act like everything's fine, like we're supposed to just move on." He threw a shirt into the bag with a force that made my heart ache. "Dylan, I'm not trying to act like everything's fine. I know it's not," I said quietly, fighting to keep my composure. "I'm hurting too, but we have to figure this out together. I'm here for you and your sister. We can get through this." "No, we can't," he interrupted, his face twisted in anger. "You don't get it, Dad. She's gone. She didn't care about us, and neither do you. You're just here because you have to be." His words hit me like a punch, but I stayed calm. "That's not true, Dylan. I love you, and I love Bella. I'm here because you're my kids, and I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever." He looked away, his jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might say something else, might let his guard down. But he just grabbed his bag and stormed past me, slamming the door as he disappeared into the night. I heard the sharp click of the back door closing and felt the weight of his words settle heavily on my shoulders. When he finally came back a few hours later, I didn't say anything. I just watched as he shuffled past me, heading straight for his room. There was a new wall between us, a jagged, raw distance that seemed to widen each day, and I didn't know how to bridge it. Meanwhile, Bella was slipping further into herself. She'd sit quietly at the kitchen table, her little face drawn and pale, pushing her food around her plate. Some days, she barely spoke, only giving me a tired nod or a tiny shake of her head when I asked her something. When I tried to talk about Mika, she'd flinch, shrinking back like the mention of her mother's name was too much to bear. I didn't know how to reach either of them. Every time I tried, it felt like I was just fumbling in the dark, saying the wrong things, pushing them further away. The weight of the silence in our house grew heavier, and I found myself just as lost and heartbroken as they were. I wanted to make things right, to somehow patch together the pieces of our shattered family. But as the days wore on, I began to wonder if I even knew where to begin. The house became my sole responsibility, every corner of it filled with a quiet bitterness that seemed to grow as I took on every role Mika had abandoned. Mornings started early, with lunches packed and hurried breakfasts prepared while Bella clung to my side, watching my every move with wide, sad eyes. Dylan barely spoke, but I kept my routine for his sake, making sure he had a ride to school, that his homework was done, even though he rolled his eyes and brushed me off at every attempt to help. I dedicated myself to being there for them every waking moment. I made sure Bella had all the hugs she needed, that I was a constant presence beside her bed when the nightmares struck. I worked with her teachers, who noticed her grades slipping and tried gently to reach out. And for Dylan, I kept myself available, even if he shut down or slammed doors in my face. I was his anchor whether he wanted me to be or not. But underneath, an anger simmered. Every time Bella whimpered for her mom, every time Dylan's face twisted with resentment, I felt it building, a quiet, seething fury at Mika for the damage she'd done, and at this mystery man whoever he was who'd helped destroy our family. As weeks turned into months, I found myself imagining them together, living it up while I was back here, holding our children's shattered hearts together with nothing but sheer willpower. The idea of them out there, carefree, without a single thought for what they'd left behind, drove me deeper into that dark place, stoking a fire I hadn't even known I was capable of. I spent nights researching Mika's new life, carefully piecing together what little I knew. It didn't take long to confirm what I'd suspected. She'd moved in with him, just a few towns over, in a house that was far bigger, far fancier than ours. I even drove by one night, parking down the block and staring at the sleek, modern building where she now lived. The lights glowed warmly from inside, and through the large windows, I could see them, Mika and this man, probably in his mid-40s, fit and polished, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. I watched as they laughed over dinner, looking like a scene out of some glossy family ad. The sight made my hands shake on the steering wheel. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to keep control, reminding myself that I had responsibilities back home. My kids were counting on me, and if I lost myself to anger, what would that make me? But that didn't stop the thoughts from coming. I wondered how I could get back at them, at her, without stooping to the level she had. I wanted Mika to understand what she'd thrown away, to feel the gravity of her actions, and for this man, whoever he was, to know exactly what he'd taken from me. So, I took the fury and turned it into fuel. I threw myself into making sure the kids were getting the best of me. I signed Bella up for dance classes, where she could meet new friends, watched her rehearsals with all the enthusiasm I could muster. I encouraged Dylan to join the soccer team again, reminding him how he used to love it before all this happened. Even though he pushed back, I stayed patient, knowing he needed me to stay calm and steady, even when he was angry at the world. And in the quiet hours of the night, I planned. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself that one day, I'd make sure Mika felt the weight of what she'd done, make sure that her life wasn't as easy and carefree as she seemed to think it could be. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about making her feel just an ounce of the pain she'd inflicted on the people who had once loved her most. For now, though, I kept that fire buried deep, channeling every ounce of my energy into being there for my kids. I let my fury simmer below the surface, a constant reminder of why I needed to keep pushing forward, why I needed to be the rock they could lean on. I was both mother and father now, and I'd be damned if I'd let Mika's betrayal destroy any more of the life we'd built. In the months after Mika's departure, the house settled into a new kind of rhythm, one that no longer revolved around her absence, but instead around a slow, steady rebuilding of what I'd lost. The focus on my kids and their well-being grounded me, but the fire that simmered below pushed me to focus on my own life as well. I couldn't rely on anyone else anymore. Everything depended on me now. That realization became my fuel, spurring me on to reshape my career, my finances, my sense of purpose. I decided that if I was going to be the sole anchor for my kids, then I needed to be rock solid, a fortress no storm could shake. I threw myself back into work with a renewed determination, taking on new projects, seeking out clients that a year ago I would have thought were out of my league. I rebranded, overhauled my website, updated my services, all things I'd put off because of the familiar routine I'd let settle around me. I'd been complacent, relying on a steady flow of basic projects to keep things afloat, but now I went after more lucrative opportunities. I stayed late at the office, built a network of industry contacts, even joined professional groups I'd never considered before. Within a year, I had landed 3 major clients, contracts that transformed my modest business into something thriving and profitable. Each new success brought a renewed sense of pride, a reminder that I was more than the man Mika had left behind. I'd rebuilt my finances from scratch, stacking up a savings buffer that offered the kind of security we'd never had before. When Mika left, we'd been scraping by, cutting corners wherever we could. Now, I could afford the little things that made life easier. A new computer for Dylan, dance classes for Bella, even the occasional family trip on weekends. I didn't have to hold my breath each month as bills piled up. For the first time, I felt free. My confidence grew as my independence solidified. I was no longer a man abandoned, left to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage. I was carving out a life on my terms, building something stronger and more stable than before. Friends noticed the shift. They saw the difference in how I carried myself, the energy I brought into every conversation. My success brought me a renewed sense of self-worth, an inner strength that Mika's betrayal had once threatened to erode. With that financial stability, I found new ways to connect with Dylan and Bella. Instead of constantly worrying about every dollar, I was able to treat them to dinners out or surprise them with a weekend trip to the mountains or tickets to a baseball game. Dylan, still guarded, couldn't completely hide his grudging admiration for the new life we were building. And Bella, her smile was finally coming back, a lightness returning to her steps that gave me hope. Mika's betrayal had fractured our family, but I was proving that we didn't need her. I was proving that I could be both the provider and the nurturer, that I could lead this family and give my kids the stability and love they needed. And the more I accomplished, the less Mika's absence haunted me. I was no longer a man left behind. I was a man moving forward, driven by purpose and, finally, a sense of independence that was wholly my own. Through it all, the quiet anger remained, but it was less a weight than a guide. It reminded me to stay focused, to remember why I was pushing so hard. Mika and her new life no longer felt like something I needed to destroy. They'd become an afterthought, a shadow that only highlighted how much I'd achieved on my own. If one day she looked back and saw the life I'd built without her, maybe she'd realize just how wrong she'd been to walk away. And that thought gave me all the satisfaction I needed. The thought of hiring a private investigator had first crossed my mind in a moment of frustration, a late night after putting the kids to bed when the house was quiet, and I felt that familiar bitterness simmering up. I'd been doing well on my own, making strides with the kids, with my career, with my self-worth, but a part of me still wanted closure. I wanted to know if the man Mika left us for was worth what she'd thrown away. So, I made the call. The detective I hired, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named Lou, had a reputation for digging deep and finding things that others missed. He took the job seriously and understood exactly what I was looking for without my even needing to explain it. I gave him the few details I knew. Mika's new address, the name of her new partner, Alan Foster, and he nodded, saying he'd be in touch within a few weeks. It didn't take him that long. Just over a week later, Lou called me back. "Donnie, you might want to sit down for this," he said, his voice calm but heavy with the kind of information he'd delivered many times before. I looked into Alan Foster. Turns out, he's not exactly the dream catcher X might think he is. I listened as Lou broke it down. Alan wasn't some self-made, successful entrepreneur as Mika must have believed. He'd been in and out of legal trouble for years, mostly for financial fraud, dodging lawsuits and settlements with a slickness that suggested he was good at manipulating people and bending the rules just enough to avoid getting caught. His wealth wasn't stable or legitimate. It was cobbled together through a series of shady investments, questionable partnerships, and financial scams that hadn't quite reached the surface. Yet, he's under investigation right now, Lou said, his tone professional, but with a hint of satisfaction. A few former business partners have turned on him, and the authorities are looking into some offshore accounts he's got stashed away. He's been careful, but his luck is running out. Give it a year, maybe less, and the house of cards he's built is likely to collapse. I let the information sink in, feeling a strange mix of vindication and anger. Mika had left us for this man, trading her family for a facade of wealth and success that was about to come crashing down. She'd given up everything that was real and solid for an illusion, for a lie. Lou continued. There's more, too. He's been sued by multiple people, ex-wives, ex-girlfriends, former business partners. Apparently, he's known for stringing people along with empty promises. He spends big, lives big, but it's all on credit he can't actually afford to pay back. He's in over his head, but Mika might not know that yet. I couldn't help but picture her in that sleek, modern house, living the life she thought she deserved, all the while sitting on a ticking time bomb. Alan's success was nothing more than a series of lies carefully stacked to look like fortune. She'd bought into his image, oblivious to the truth, as if the universe was about to serve her a taste of the betrayal she'd served us. Lou wrapped up with a dry chuckle. You know, this guy is probably on his last hurrah. He's burnt through just about every bridge he has. Wouldn't surprise me if he's counting on your ex-wife's trust or her finances to help him stay afloat. Once the fraud investigations kick in, he'll likely be scrounging for any resource he can cling to. I thanked Lou, paying him promptly, feeling every cent was worth the peace of mind his report brought me. It wasn't revenge, exactly, but it was justice in a way. Mika had chosen Alan over us, thinking she'd found something better. But now I knew the truth. She'd left us for a life that would soon unravel. And when it did, she'd be left with nothing but the fallout of her own decisions. When I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The glamour Mika had chased was about to crumble, and for once, I didn't feel the need to do anything about it. I had my kids, my career, my own growing success. She had a fraud, a man with an expiration date on his wealth and his charm. The irony tasted sweet, and for the first time, I felt the closure I'd been seeking. The idea came to me gradually, a quiet thought that grew louder each time I imagined Mika's new life, built on the foundation of Alan's lies. Knowing the truth about him wasn't enough. It gnawed at me, the thought that this man, who'd wrecked my family and seduced Mika with nothing but empty promises, was still out there, fooling others, thriving on deceit. I wasn't sure how I'd go about it at first, but Lou's report provided everything I needed. I had a list of Alan's investors, key clients and associates, people who'd unknowingly bankrolled his schemes. It didn't take long to assemble an anonymous email account and draft a few carefully worded messages. I wrote them late at night, making sure every detail was just right, concise, and professional. Each email armed with links to court records, pending lawsuits, and enough evidence of Alan's fraud to make anyone question their relationship with him. Once the emails were ready, I waited. Then in one night I sent them all. It was like lighting a fuse, and all I had to do now was sit back and watch as it burned its way through Alan's carefully constructed life. Within days, the first cracks appeared. One of Alan's largest investors, a firm with deep pockets, started backing out of their deal, citing sudden concerns about his financial history. Word spread, and soon other clients, people he depended on for his image of success, began pulling their funds, questioning his legitimacy. I followed each development online, scouring business sites and forums, watching as his once polished name became synonymous with scandal. Articles popped up, speculating about his financial stability, citing sources who spoke anonymously about his unusual business practices. Alan tried to downplay the accusations, but it wasn't long before reporters dug deeper, unearthing older lawsuits and former business partners who'd lost money in similar scams. In a few short weeks, he went from being a reputable businessman to a pariah, his once loyal clients cutting all ties, his business unraveling as investors pulled out faster than he could try to secure them. The whole thing was a firestorm, and it only grew, with social media fueling rumors and allegations that Alan had taken loans he couldn't pay back, that he'd lied to clients and falsified documents to cover his tracks. For the first time since Mika had left, I felt real satisfaction. The man she'd chosen over us, the one she'd gambled everything for, was going down in flames. And Mika, she was about to feel the full weight of her choices, her illusion of wealth and security crumbling along with Alan's reputation. Then one afternoon, I heard from a friend of mine who still kept in touch with some of Mika's friends. He mentioned almost casually that he'd heard she was looking for a lawyer, trying to get out of a sticky financial situation. Apparently, she'd invested a significant amount in Alan's business, believing his promises of a high return. I could only imagine the look on her face as she watched her savings disappear, realizing that she'd tied herself to a man who'd lied about everything. It didn't take long for news to spread that Alan had filed for bankruptcy. I read each headline with grim satisfaction, knowing that I'd finally made him face the consequences of his lies. By the time the dust settled, he was financially ruined, a laughingstock among those who'd once called him a colleague. His glamorous lifestyle, his sleek house, and flashy cars, everything Mika had fallen for, were gone. And now, she was left standing in the wreckage. I thought about reaching out just to hear her reaction, but I decided against it. She'd made her choice, and now she was living with it. Instead, I focused on my kids, on the life we'd rebuilt without her. Watching Alan's downfall had brought a certain kind of justice, but I'd moved on, and I realized I didn't need her validation. I was free of her and the pain she'd caused, and I had all the closure I needed. In the end, I'd won back more than I'd ever lost. I had my family, my career, and the satisfaction of knowing that Mika's perfect life had shattered, just as she'd shattered ours. And that, finally, was enough. It was at one of those charity events I'd reluctantly agreed to attend, a small, local fundraiser for a youth program in town, that I met Nadine. I was standing off to the side, nursing a glass of wine, when I saw her by the silent auction table, talking animatedly with a group of volunteers. She had this warm, effortless smile, and a natural energy that seemed to draw everyone in. But she wasn't just putting on a show. There was something genuine in her laughter, a kind of warmth that felt out of place in a room full of forced conversations and polite small talk. She glanced over, catching me looking. Instead of averting her eyes, she gave me a curious smile and walked over, holding out her hand. Hey, Nadine. I don't think we've met before. I introduced myself, a little surprised by how easy it felt to talk to her. Usually, small talk at these things drained me, but with Nadine, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We covered the usual topics, kids, work, why we come to the event in the first place, but there was a depth to her questions and responses that made the conversation feel real, not just polite filler. As the evening went on, I learned that Nadine was a single mother to a 10-year-old son, Max. Her husband had passed away unexpectedly a few years back, leaving her to navigate life as a single parent. She didn't share the details, but she didn't have to. I could see it in the way her eyes softened when she mentioned him, the way she spoke about Max with a protective warmth. She understood the struggles I'd been through, the quiet burden of being both mother and father, of being the one to hold the family together even on the hardest days. After the event ended, we exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we found reasons to stay in touch. We'd meet for coffee or text to share stories about our kids. It was small things at first, little moments here and there that slowly turned into longer conversations. I found myself looking forward to her texts, to the afternoons when we'd meet at the local park with Bella, Dylan, and Max, letting the kids run around while we talked on a bench nearby. Dylan, who'd kept his walls up since Mika left, seemed to take to Nadine in a way that surprised me. She treated him with respect, talking to him as though he were an adult, not a brooding teenager, and slowly, he began to respond to her. Bella, on the other hand, was immediately drawn to her. Nadine had a nurturing way about her, a warmth that seemed to make Bella feel safe. She'd sit close to Nadine during our outings, watching her with a quiet admiration that I hadn't seen in her for a long time. One evening, after we'd spent the day at the park, Nadine invited us over for dinner. Her house was modest, cozy, filled with little reminders of her life with Max. She welcomed us in with an easy grace, making us all feel instantly at home. The kids bonded over board games in the living room, laughing and teasing each other, while Nadine and I lingered in the kitchen, talking as she prepared a simple meal. There was a calmness to the night, a sense of family and stability that I hadn't felt in years. As weeks turned into months, Nadine became a constant in our lives. We spent weekends together, taking the kids on day trips, cheering them on at their games and school events. There was no rush, no pressure, just a natural, unhurried closeness that grew with time. One evening, after we'd tucked the kids in, Nadine and I sat on her porch, a quiet, starlit night settling around us. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a peace I thought I'd lost. With Nadine, I didn't have to pretend to be strong, didn't have to hide the scars Mika had left behind. She understood those unspoken wounds, having her own, and together, we found a way to move forward. Our relationship brought a new stability to my family, a warmth that filled the empty spaces Mika had left. Dylan started opening up more, even cracking jokes again, and Bella's laughter became a daily sound in our home. Watching them grow close to Nadine, seeing the way she'd gently guide them or comfort them when they struggled, showed me that she was becoming more than a friend to us. She was becoming a part of our family, a piece of the life I hadn't known we were missing. And as I held her hand that night, I knew I was ready to let go of the past, to leave behind the pain and resentment, and to embrace this second chance at happiness. For me, for Dylan and Bella, and for all the beautiful moments yet to come. Word of Alan's downfall spread fast. It was all over local business news, investors suing him, creditors hounding him, authorities investigating every account he'd ever opened. The facade he kept so carefully constructed crumbled, exposing every fraud, every lie, every debt he'd concealed. The glamorous life Mika had left us for dissolved into nothing but mounting bills, phone calls she didn't want to answer, and the realization that the man she'd chosen was nothing more than a con artist on the verge of ruin. From what I heard, Alan turned cold, almost vicious, as his financial security slipped away. He went from charming to cruel, snapping at her for the smallest things, blaming her for everything, as if she were somehow at fault for the lies he'd spun. Mika had once believed she was leaving for someone better, someone with wealth, ambition, drive. Now, she found herself stuck with a man whose anger bubbled over into hostility and blame. A man who was slowly but surely cutting her off from any remaining illusion of security she might have clung to. It wasn't long before he left, slamming the door on the life they'd built together, abandoning her with a cold finality that mirrored how she'd once walked out on us. The last few mutual friends she'd clung to vanished, unwilling to get involved in the toxic fallout of Alan's life. She reached out to a few of her old friends, people who had been there for her once, but she was met with indifference, some of them politely brushing her off, others not bothering to respond at all. She was alone, living in an empty apartment with only the bills piling up and the echo of her decisions. She didn't have the money to move back to the house she'd left behind, and even if she did, I knew that was the last place she wanted to be. There was no going back to her old life, not after the choices she'd made, not after the things she'd thrown away. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a measure of satisfaction, a dark kind of justice in seeing her life unravel the way it had. I imagined her staring at that bleak, hollow reality, each corner of her life casting shadows of the choices she'd made, the family she'd abandoned, the friendships she'd severed, all for the hollow promises of a man who'd played her as easily as he had everyone else. It was a cold reminder of the consequences of betrayal, of leaving behind the people who truly cared for you. One evening, while I was with Nadine and the kids, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated, a strange feeling of foreboding settling over me before opening it. The message was from Mika. She didn't even bother with pleasantries, just a simple, desperate plea. "Donnie, I need help. Please." I didn't respond. I let the message sit there, a ghost from a life I'd long since left behind, a reminder of a choice she'd made, and of a family that had learned to move on without her. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when Mika showed up at my door unannounced. I was in the middle of preparing dinner with Nadine, the kids laughing and playing a board game in the living room, the air filled with the warmth and noise of our new life. I almost didn't hear the knock at first, but when I opened the door, there she was, Mika, looking smaller than I remembered, with shadows under her eyes and a lost, uncertain expression on her face. "Donnie," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I stared at her, taken aback, but composed myself quickly. "I'm not sure what you expect, Mika," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She glanced over my shoulder, where she could see the family scene unfolding behind me, and her eyes softened with something like regret. I made a mistake," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leaving. Choosing Alan, it was all a mistake. I thought I wanted something else, something better, but," she trailed off, looking down at her hands. "But I was wrong." I could feel Nadine's presence nearby, quietly watching, though she didn't intrude. I knew she would let me handle this, trusting me to say what needed to be said. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Mika," I began, "you didn't just make a mistake. You walked out on us, on me, on Dylan and Bella, because you thought you could have something more, something that didn't involve us." She winced, the weight of her decisions suddenly clear on her face. "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. I just thought maybe we could try again. I don't expect it to be easy, but if you could just give me a chance. I miss the kids. I miss us." I shook my head slowly, feeling a mix of sadness and finality wash over me. "There is no us anymore, Mika. That end of the day, you chose Alan over us. You left, and you didn't just hurt me. You hurt the kids, too. Bella cried herself to sleep for months, and Dylan—" I stopped, my voice thick. "Dylan still struggles to let people in because of what you did." Her face crumpled as she looked away, struggling to hold back tears. "I didn't realize. I thought they'd be fine. I didn't think." "You didn't think," I echoed. "Exactly." Behind me, I could hear Bella laughing, Nadine teasing her about something, the sound a reminder of the life I'd fought to rebuild. I wasn't the man Mika had left. I was someone different, someone stronger, someone who'd rebuilt his family, who'd found a way to move on. "Mika," I said, gentler now but firm, "I've moved on. We all have. I'm with someone else now, someone who's been there for me and for the kids when we needed it most. I'm sorry you're hurting, but you chose this life. You left us to chase something else, and now, we're no longer part of your life. That's not something I can change." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes, her face pale. But they're my children, she said, her voice breaking. They need their mother. I shook my head, feeling that final door closing between us. No, Mika. They needed you then. They've got a family now, one that won't walk away. A hollow silence settled between us. She took a shaky breath, her gaze lingering on me, as if trying to find a way back, but there was no path left for her to take. She'd walked away from us long ago, and now she was on the outside, looking in on a life that no longer held a place for her. I understand, she whispered finally, her voice thick with defeat. She turned slowly, her steps uncertain as she walked back down the path, alone. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of sadness and peace. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. And as I closed the door and walked back into the warmth and laughter of my family, I knew, without a doubt, that I'd finally let her go. The legal battle Mika launched to try to take the kids was her last desperate grasp at control. After our final confrontation at the door, she'd gone quiet for a while, retreating into the shadows. But then I received the notice, a petition for custody, claiming that I was somehow unfit to care for Dylan and Bella on my own. She painted herself as a changed woman, desperate to reconnect with her children and provide them with a stable family she'd abandoned. For months, we fought it out in court. The hearings were grueling, forcing me to relive the pain and betrayal I'd worked so hard to move past. Mika tried every tactic, playing up her role as a repentant mother, her lawyers questioning every detail of my life, my parenting, even bringing Nadine into it, suggesting that introducing a stranger to the kids was disruptive. I could feel the toll it took on Dylan and Bella. They didn't understand why their mother was doing this, why she was suddenly trying to claw her way back into their lives after all the hurt she'd caused. But I refused to back down. I had come too far to let Mika shatter the peace and stability I'd fought to rebuild. Nadine stood by me, every step of the way, a calming presence during late nights of preparation, every bit as determined as I was to keep our family intact. She cared for Dylan and Bella as if they were her own, offering them the kind of support that Mika had long since forfeited. In the end, Mika's case unraveled. The court saw her history of abandonment, her attempt to manipulate her way back into their lives after everything she'd done. She had no credible reason to take them away, no foundation of care or commitment to stand on. Her pleas rang hollow, and when the judge finally ruled in my favor, granting me full custody and limited visitation rights for Mika, it was the closure I had waited for, the moment I'd finally reclaimed my family from the chaos she'd left behind. A week after the ruling, Mika asked to meet. I agreed one last time to put it all to rest. We met at a quiet park where the kids often played, a final neutral ground. She looked thinner, her face drawn, her eyes tired. She was a shadow of the woman she had once been, but her expression held a flicker of defiance, as if she still believed she had some right to demand something from me. I just wanted to see them, she began, her voice barely steady. They're still my children, Donnie. I nodded, feeling none of the anger that used to twist in my chest at the sight of her. Instead, I felt an odd calm. They're not possessions, Mika. You don't get to walk back in and out of their lives as it suits you. She swallowed hard, her eyes drifting toward the empty playground. I thought I could make things right. It's too late for that, I replied, my voice gentle but resolute. They don't need a mother who only wants to be there when it's convenient. They need stability, Mika, and that's something they've finally found. She met my gaze, the realization settling heavily in her eyes. I could see it, the understanding that she had lost them, truly lost them, and there was no path back. This was it, the end of her hold on us. I hope you find what you're looking for, I told her, meaning it. But it won't be with us. With that, I turned and walked away, not looking back, leaving her standing alone in the park, surrounded by the echoes of a life she'd left behind. From that day on, life moved forward with a new clarity. Dylan seemed lighter, his laughter coming more freely, and Bella no longer hesitated before bedtime, finding comfort in the routines and love Nadine and I built together. Slowly, I saw the wounds Mika had left on us all beginning to heal, the scars fading as our new life took shape. Our family wasn't traditional, but it was real. Nadine was my partner in every sense of the word, sharing both the laughter and the late-night worries, helping me make a home that was strong and safe for all of us. We celebrated milestones together, birthdays and game wins and dance recitals. every moment a testament to the resilience we'd found as a family. With each day that passed, the shadow of Mika's betrayal faded further into the past. Our lives no longer revolved around what she'd taken from us, but around what we'd built in her absence. I looked at my children, at Nadine, at the future we were crafting, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't thought possible: peace. I knew there would still be challenges, and that scars don't disappear overnight. But we had each other, and that was enough. We were free to grow, to love, and to move forward into a life that was finally, truly ours. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.